Hello, dear friends. Today we will read Otto Carius's memoirs. In this part of his memoirs, he shares his first impressions of the Tiger tank. He also describes the technical characteristics of this tank in detail. I think it will be really interesting to hear his opinion. Don't forget to leave your opinion about this material and support this video with a like. Well, let's begin. In Brittany. However, first we headed west to Ploermel in Brittany. The company was sent to an abandoned castle. The company commander and his deputy were given separate accommodation in the town. I preferred to stay with the company. We needed to get to know each other if we were going to go into battle together. None of my actions went unnoticed. I willingly and naturally accepted all the inconveniences we had to face in the small, musty room of our castle. The fun began as soon as we moved in. We had to clean up the old stables before we could even think about living there. There was no wooden floor or wooden planks. At first, I wanted to get at least some straw for my people, but the neighboring farm refused to give me anything without a written order from the local administration. So I went to the city hall, but it was already closed. I quickly filled out a document for the farmer myself so that he could use it to file a complaint. Just as quickly, I received a reprimand from the battalion commander. If we hadn't left for the Eastern Front shortly thereafter, I would probably have been dragged through the courts, charged with theft or something like that. After the war, I often thought about this when I saw how easily the French occupation forces provided themselves with everything they needed at our expense. During this period, I had to take a war crime on my conscience, a reprisal without trial or investigation. I was next in line during live fire exercises on the outskirts of town when a rooster from a neighboring farm ran right across the firing range. Most likely, an order had been given to keep animals from peasant farms in pens during the shooting. I had just taken aim when the rooster got between me and my target. The commander shouted something, but it was too late. The rooster did a few somersaults and then turned into something hardly edible. The company commander was sternly reprimanding me when the rooster's distraught owner came running up, having had to say goodbye to her beloved pet. Even money couldn't calm her down, because the killed rooster was clearly the best in the neighborhood. Red wine was, of course, an integral part of our stay in France. The Austrians in the company were particularly fond of it. There was not a single evening when I did not have to jump out of bed and put the drunken Austrians to bed. The barracks guard was usually unable to turn off the lights, as more than half of the company consisted of non-commissioned officers who served as drivers, gunners, and tank commanders. I almost always had to call lights out myself. But usually this did not happen until I had drained the glass of wine offered to me and listened to a Viennese song. We did not take the mandatory drills and formations too seriously. We just pretended to move when the bosses appeared, so as not to stand out too much. I was happy to enjoy a few carefree days before being sent to the front. Soon, teams were formed to transport the Tigers from Germany and hand them over. One of these teams was entrusted to me, so I had to stay in Paris. I was very interested in the city and its inhabitants, although it was difficult to maintain a conversation with them. I admired the way the French behaved. God knows they had lost the war, but not a word was said to reproach their soldiers. They also refrained from any criticism of us. It seems that only Germans are capable of denigrating their own name. Our troops in Paris behaved as if the war was already over and won. This behavior struck me. I never forgot that in a few weeks we would be back at war with the Russians. What does the Tiger look like? Naturally, on the way back, our thoughts were occupied with the new tank. How would the Tiger behave? Outwardly, it looked nice and was pleasing to the eye. It was thick. Almost all flat surfaces were horizontal, and only the front slope was welded almost vertically. Thicker armor compensated for the lack of rounded shapes. Ironically, just before the war, we had supplied the Russians with a huge hydraulic press, which they used to produce their T-34s with such elegantly rounded surfaces. Our weapons specialists did not consider them valuable. In their opinion, such thick armor could never be needed. As a result, we had to put up with flat surfaces. Even if our Tiger was not a beauty, its strength inspired us. It really did drive like a car. With just 2 fingers, we could control a 60-ton giant with 700 horsepower, traveling at a speed of 45 kilometers per hour on the road and 20 kilometers per hour on rough terrain. However, with the additional equipment, we could only travel at a speed of 20 to 25 kilometers per hour on the road and even slower off-road. Apparently, the greatest responsibility for the readiness of the machine fell on the driver-mechanic. He had to drive the machine using his head, not his rear end. If he acted decisively, his Tiger would never let him down in a difficult moment. Only a truly good tank driver could be allowed to drive a Tiger, and, in addition, he had to have a keen sense of the nature of the terrain. He would have to know how to drive properly over rough terrain. He must always keep the tank facing the enemy with its least vulnerable side, without expecting the tank commander to tell him every maneuver. Only then will the tank commander be able to focus entirely on the enemy, and the platoon or company commander will be able to direct the vehicle where it needs to go during the battle without being constantly distracted by the nature of the terrain. A tank driver also needs willpower. After all, he is the only member of the crew who can see a lot, but who has to remain passive when the tank is under fire and the other crew members are engaged in combat with the enemy. In such cases, he helps by observing and must rely entirely on his comrades in the turret. Considering the above qualities of a driver-mechanic, it becomes clear why they, rather than gunners, usually become tank commanders. Take, for example, 2 commanders, Kircher and Link. Both were originally driver mechanics. Likewise, my old faithful Karl Baresch immediately took my place as tank commander after I was wounded in 1944. Allow me to share some interesting information with the reader to show how our work is not over at the end of a combat operation. For all of us, especially the driver, it is really just beginning, because we have to be in good shape the next day. The fuel tanks hold 530 liters. That's 27 20-liter cans. With that amount, we could travel exactly 80 kilometers across rough terrain. Maintaining the batteries was important, especially in winter. They had to be constantly recharged by starting the engine if we hadn't driven too much before that. Otherwise, the starter would no longer be able to start the engine. If that happened, 2 crew members would get out and start the engine with an inertia starter, similar to the one used on old airplanes, but located at the rear. It doesn't take much imagination to understand that there is no situation more extreme than this, in the heat of battle and in full view of the enemy. Despite our efforts, sometimes the batteries would run low. At the front, we soon came up with an original way to avoid getting out. We called a neighboring tank. It turned its gun backward, slowly crawled up behind the front tank, pushed the stuck tank, and its engine usually started after a few meters of forward movement. The radio equipment, internal and external lighting, fan, and electric gun trigger depended on the batteries, so it is understandable how important their condition was. A 120-liter water radiator and 4 fans provided engine cooling. The cooling system louvers at the rear, which were absolutely necessary for removing heated air, often caused the tank to lose its combat capability after being hit by shells or shrapnel that would otherwise have caused no damage. They damaged the radiators located at the bottom. The engine required 28 liters of oil, the transmission 30 liters, the reduction gear 12 liters, the turret mechanism 5 liters, and the fan motors 7 liters. A pair of large air cleaners capture dust. Considering that 170,000 liters of air are pumped into the vehicle when traveling just 7 kilometers, while dust is raised from the surface of almost 4 acres of land, and this amount is inhaled by a person sitting in the stern in the dustiest place, it is clear that cleaning the air filters is necessary before each march. With a regularly cleaned filter, it is possible to cover 5,000 kilometers during an operation without replacing the engine. With dirty filters, we would not be able to cover even 500 kilometers. 4 carburetors supplied fuel to the engine, and the entire process was controlled by the driver mechanic. The capriciousness of the carburetors was the biggest drawback of German gasoline engines, which were inferior to the unpretentious Russian diesel engines. However, the ability to restore operating mode more quickly was an advantage of the German tank engine. The semi-automatic transmission had 8 forward and 4 reverse gears. They allowed the traction force to be transferred from one track to another when turning. When turning in place, one track moved forward and the other backward. The transmission was equipped with an automatic hydraulic servo drive. There was no need to press the main clutch pedal to change gears. The Tiger's driver sat at the controls and could steer the 63-ton machine as easily as a car. Other tanks required a lot of effort to control. The overlapping suspension had 8 axles on each side. Each axle had 3 balancers that rotated inside the track and simultaneously supported it. Lighter types of German tanks had both balancers and support rollers. Just think how many of these rollers would have to be removed from the Tiger if only one internal roller needed to be replaced. The 22-liter engine worked best at 2,600 revolutions per minute. At 3,000 revolutions per minute, it quickly overheated. Before loading the tank onto the platform, the off-road track had to be replaced with a narrower one. Otherwise, it would stick out on the sides of the platform and pose a danger to oncoming traffic. Special 6-axle platforms were designed for transport by rail. They could carry 80 tons and followed each battalion to the combat zone. In order not to create a dangerous load on railway bridges, at least 4 other freight cars had to be placed between 2 platforms with Tigers. The turret was rotated using a hydraulic transmission. The gunner's feet rested on an inclined pedal. If he pressed forward with his toe, the turret turned to the right. If he pressed backward with his heel, it turned to the left. The harder he pressed in one direction or the other, the faster the movement. At the slowest speed, it took 60 minutes to rotate the turret 360 degrees. At the fastest speed, it took 60 seconds. This ensured extreme accuracy in aiming. An experienced gunner did not need to adjust the aim manually afterwards. With the gun's electric trigger, a light press of the finger was enough to fire a shot. This made it possible to avoid the inevitable recoil when firing. Our most dangerous opponents in Russia were the T-34 and T-34-85 tanks, which were equipped with long-barreled 76.2 and 85mm guns. These tanks posed a threat to us at a distance of 600 meters from the front, 1,500 meters from the sides, and 1,800 meters from the rear. If we hit such a tank, we could destroy it from 900 meters with our 88mm gun. The Joseph Stalin tank, which we encountered in 1944, was at least equal to the Tiger. It had a significant advantage in terms of shape, as did the T-34. I will not go into detail about the KV-1, KV-85, and other less common types of enemy tanks, as well as larger caliber self-propelled guns. A tank company fully equipped with Tigers had 14 combat vehicles. Their combat power thus exceeded that of an entire anti-aircraft battalion, 3 batteries of 4 guns each. The cost of producing one Tiger reached 1 million Reichsmarks. For this reason, only a few heavy tank battalions were formed. Becoming the commander of such a company meant taking on a great deal of responsibility. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. See you all soon!